Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, today we are tackling the absolute ultimate mystery. Honestly, of all the wild things in the universe, from black holes to quantum mechanics, nothing is more perplexing, or frankly, more intimate, than the subjective experience of being you. Why does it feel like anything at all to be alive? Well, we're going to demystify this whole phenomenon by looking at how three completely different frameworks have tried to solve the massive puzzle of consciousness.
So here's the core question we absolutely have to start with. What exactly is the mind? To answer this, we're going to put on our detective hats. We're going to look through three completely different lenses that have investigated the exact same phenomenon. Imagine you're holding a brilliantly cut diamond, right? And you're looking at it from three different angles. Every angle gives you a totally different flash of light, but at the end of the day, it's all the exact same stone.
Here's our mental map for today. First up, Theravāda Buddhism and the mind stream. Second, neuroscience, viewing the brain as a biological machine. Third, psychology and the functional mind. And finally, the grand synthesis, where I'm going to reveal some truly mind-blowing overlaps between these distinct paradigms.
All right, Section 1, Theravāda Buddhism, the mind stream. Let's get into it.
Let's kick things off with our first lens. Theravāda offers us this incredible 2,500-year-old first-person subjective perspective. Now, what's really fascinating here is that consciousness isn't viewed as this static soul or some permanent container holding your thoughts. Actually, it's a highly rapid sequence of discrete, interdependent processing flash moments. Think of it like a stream, constantly moving, constantly changing. And what's super interesting is how this framework completely expands our traditional Western view of the senses. I mean, we all know the big five, right? Eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. But Theravāda actually classifies the mind itself as a sixth distinct sense organ. So just like your eye perceives physical shapes, the mind is literally an organ that perceives mental objects, things like abstract thoughts, memories, and ideas.
And if you're wondering just how complex this ancient system is, well, the numbers speak for themselves. According to the Abhidhamma, which is basically the ancient scholastic psychology of Theravāda, there are 89, and in some classifications up to 121, distinct types of states of consciousness. They call these Cittas, and these aren't just vague, random feelings. We're talking about highly granular, precise states colored by very specific mental factors. It is just a staggering level of psychological mapping, especially when you realize it's from over 2 millennia ago.
But you might be wondering, what happens when you aren't actively sensing anything? Well, enter the Bhavanga Citta. This is the passive baseline stream of consciousness. Imagine you're in a deep, dreamless sleep. Your mind doesn't just wink out of existence, it reverts to this baseline life continuum. And here is the absolutely crucial point for this ancient framework. The core axiom of this whole system is Anatta, which translates to non-self. Because this consciousness is in a constant conditional flux, viewing it as a permanent soul or some enduring I is actually seen as the fundamental root of all suffering.
Moving right along to Section 2, Modern Neuroscience, the Biological Machine.
So, shifting from pure introspection to hard empirical science, neuroscientists view the mind strictly as an emergent property of incredibly complex biological computations. From this materialist framework, it's pretty simple. No brain equals no consciousness. The absolute holy grail for neuroscientists is pinning down the NCC, or the neural correlates of consciousness. That's the exact, minimal biological machinery required to make you actually feel and experience. You can think of the reticular activating system in your brainstem as sort of the main power switch. If that gets damaged, you fall into a coma. And then your thalamocortical loops act as the central relay station, basically filtering and broadcasting all those sensory inputs to create your conscious awareness.
This actually brings us to a brilliant illustration of how that machinery might work, the global workspace theory. It helps to just picture your mind as a theater. Step 1. You've got countless unconscious processes operating totally in the dark, basically backstage. Step 2. A specific piece of information gets pulled out onto the illuminated stage. In your brain, that's the prefrontal and parietal cortices. Then, Step 3. Once it's on that stage, that information is globally broadcast to the rest of the brain. That's when it becomes a conscious thought, something you can actually speak about or act upon.
But there's another leading theory that takes a totally different approach. Integrated information theory, or IIT, shifts the focus entirely away from biological function and looks strictly at the architecture. It basically suggests that consciousness is just a mathematical property.
If a system has a massive repertoire of distinct states that are highly integrated, which they measure with a metric called phi, then boom, it's conscious. Under this theory, it doesn't even matter if you're made of biological neurons or silicon chips. High integration simply equals high consciousness.
Okay, Section 3. Modern Psychology, the Functional Mind. Now, unlike biology or ancient meditation practices, modern psychology really examines how consciousness functions in our daily, everyday lives. How does it adapt to our environment? How do internal mental dynamics actually drive what we do? And you really can't talk about functional psychology without bringing up Freud's famous iceberg metaphor. His topographical model splits our minds into 3 distinct layers. The very tip of the iceberg, right there above the water, is the conscious mind. That's what you are actively aware of right now. Just below the surface is the preconscious, stuff you can easily recall if you try, like your phone number. But then you have this massive, unseen bulk underneath. That's the unconscious mind, this vast reservoir of hidden drives, repressed memories, and urges that silently dictate so much of our behavior.
Moving forward into cognitive psychology, we actually find that our active conscious workspace is surprisingly small. George Miller famously quantified our working memory capacity with this well-known rule, 7 ± 2 items. And modern models even suggest it's closer to just 4 active chunks of information at any given time. It really puts things into perspective, showing us that our conscious attention is a highly limited, super precious resource. Meanwhile, our unconscious is just chugging along, handling the vast majority of our routine, automated tasks perfectly in the background.
But here's the thing. Psychology runs into a massive brick wall when dealing with something called qualia. Qualia is essentially the raw, internal, subjective feel of an experience. It's the specific, vibrant redness of a rose, or the exact, unexplainable, heavy ache of grief. It's incredibly hard to pin down. Psychology, and frankly science in general, struggles deeply to explain how objective, physical mechanisms in the brain can somehow generate these deeply personal, qualitative realities that we all feel.
And that brings us to Section 4, the grand synthesis, overlaps and divergences.
Okay, let's dive right into this grand synthesis. We've looked at an ancient introspective religion, hard empirical biology, and functional behavioral science. Now we're going to see exactly how these 3 drastically different paradigms overlap and where they just fundamentally diverge. The crux of it all is summarized beautifully right here. Just look at how they differ on the mind-matter relationship. Neuroscience is strict materialism, right? The mind is simply what the brain does. But Theravāda sees them as mutually dependent. The mind can actually lead the physical body. Or take the concept of the self. To psychology, the self, or the ego, is a vital central construct you need for a healthy life. But to both Theravāda and neuroscience, the self is actually an illusion. Let's unpack that a bit more.
Honestly, this next part is one of the most mind-blowing parallels in our entire explainer. Thousands of years ago, relying purely on deep meditation, Theravāda identified the Bhavanga Citta. Again, that's the baseline resting state the mind naturally falls into when there are no external sensory stimuli. Now, fast forward to modern times. Neuroscientists put people inside fMRI machines and ended up discovering the default mode network. It is the exact same concept. It's a literal, physical network of interacting brain regions that activate specifically when a person is mind-wandering and completely detached from the outside world. How cool is that?
And here is another truly shocking point of agreement. Theravāda calls it Anatta, the realization that there is no solid you, but rather a rapid sequence of mind moments, tricking you into feeling like a permanent entity. Well, modern neuroscience arrived at the exact same conclusion, just through objective data. They found there is no homunculus, no little person sitting inside your brain pulling levers. Instead, different independent brain modules are essentially voting on actions, and your brain retroactively creates this narrative illusion just to make you feel like a unified self.
So let's see how all of this builds toward their ultimate end goals, because this is where they irreconcilably diverge. For neuroscience, the goal is highly practical. We want to map brain states to treat medical pathologies or maybe build advanced brain-computer interfaces. For psychology, the goal is therapeutic. It's about constructing a healthy, resilient ego so you can actually function optimally in everyday society. But Buddhism, it goes in the exact opposite direction. Its goal is to dismantle the ego entirely. It argues that clinging to consciousness itself is the ultimate barrier to finding true peace and liberation.
We've covered a ton of ground today, looking at the mind through 3 vastly different yet surprisingly connected lenses. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative question to ponder. If neuroscience and Buddhism are right, and the self is just a biological illusion, or a rapid stream of conditional flash moments, and if psychology is right, that it's simply a functional mental construct, then who exactly is the one watching this explainer right now? Take that thought with you today. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.